Hello and welcome to Strange Stories. It's great to have you here. We are all about sharing stories of near-death experiences from around the world in the hopes of bringing some light and inspiration to your day. Our daily videos offer a glimpse into what lies beyond this life, and we believe that they can help us all appreciate the gift of life a little bit more. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to stay up to date on all of our latest videos. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue to grow. And to our returning viewers, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us again. So go ahead, grab a cozy blanket, get comfy, and join us for today's incredible near-death experience story. Robert Byer is my given name. I'd like to spend the next hour or so with you discussing my near-death experiences because my life has changed dramatically since my NDEs. I was a policeman and I was very black and white, probably very strict and super conservative. That's how I carried myself and interacted with those I worked with and with whom I had dealings. When I retired from the California Highway Patrol, I began doing other things that gave me a lot of power. Not only did I have power as a cop, but so do university professors. You have power as a city manager or general manager, and you make decisions that impact people's lives. I bring this up because I believe you'll understand what I'm talking about as I describe my near-death experience. In 2008, I was at home when I received a call from an old police colleague. We would talk on occasion, and you have a good friend when you can pick up the phone and call them. It's as if the conversation never ended. We'd worked as cops together in the 1960s. As we were catching up, he paused for a moment and said, "Robert, I feel compelled to ask you a question." "What's that?" I asked. "Is everything okay with the Lord?" he asked. "What are you on about?" I asked. "I just feel compelled to ask you," he says. "Well, I believe I am." I didn't think about it again after we had our brief discussion. This was in 2008. I was sleeping one night near the end of 2008 when I awoke to find my mother at the foot of my bed. She died in 2005, and she was stunning. She reminded me of my mother when I was a child, and she spoke to me in a language I didn't understand. I believe it was telepathic communication. I'm not sure, but I heard every word that was meant for me to hear. She told me that I was going to die in order to settle my affairs and handle all of my personal matters. Then, she just disappeared. I was so angry at myself because there she was, and I should have told her how much I loved her and missed her. I blew that opportunity. I was drenched in perspiration. I awoke because I couldn't sleep any longer. I called my father. He was still alive at the time and told him what had happened. Then again, who doesn't? I remember telling him how young and beautiful she was. My friend who had called me died not long after. I was very depressed. I went down to California and took part in a celebration of life, giving a brief eulogy about our time together. I returned home and was preparing to travel to Arizona. Every spring, I traveled to Arizona to visit my son and his family. My son was a high school football, baseball, and basketball coach, as well as a history teacher. He had a spring break. All of the spring training games were happening at the same time. I used to go down and we'd spend time together going to basketball games. I go to spend time with my granddaughters, which was a lot of fun. Just before I went down there, I woke up in the middle of the night again, and my friend who died was at the foot of my bed, almost exactly the same way my mother presented herself to me. He appeared to be in his 20s. He just looked at me and he said, "I'm going to bring you through the light." I'm not sure whether he communicated verbally or telepathically. I believe it was telepathically. "What are you on about?" I asked, and he said, "I have to leave now. I'd like to pay a visit to my grandchildren in Sacramento." He just vanished. So I couldn't sleep again, and it's kind of creepy. But after a few phone calls, I discovered that his grandchildren did live in Sacramento, which I had no idea about. I had just had a full physical and had put it in the back of my mind. Then again, who doesn't? This was in March of 2009, and it was extremely hot for the time of year. Every day was either 100 degrees or close to it, and we were going to baseball games, usually 2 a day, and I just didn't feel well. And I come from a coastal climate in Oregon. I'm used to a cooler climate, and I kind of thought it was just I just never adjusted to the heat, and it just bothered me. But I kept getting sicker and sicker, or feeling sicker and sicker. And I was actually looking forward to getting on the plane and returning to Oregon. So the day came for me to leave, which was March 22nd. By the way, my birthday is March 21st, the day after my birthday. And then my son dropped me off at the airport, and we said our goodbyes. When I arrived at the airport, I noticed a long TSA line. How am I going to do this? I wondered. I didn't feel well. I made it to the finish line. After that, I went to a small convenience store and purchased some aspirin. It's probably a good thing I did. I took the aspirins and went to the gate where the plane is. I boarded the plane, and as I was putting things in the overhead bin, I died of a massive heart attack. I was fortunate because there were 2 off-duty firemen from the Pacific Northwest on the plane. There was also a doctor on board, and they knew how to use a defibrillator and perform CPR. And I don't remember anything about it because I was drawn into the light. And I recall seeing colors that do not exist on Earth. It was absolutely lovely and warm, and there was someone with me. There may have been more than one person or soul with me. I have no idea. And I ended up in a situation that wasn't quite like an auditorium. I'm at a loss for words. I was aware that there were people or souls all around me, but I didn't pay much attention to them because there was a higher power right in front of me, and I couldn't look at the higher power. It was humbling, and I have no idea how it was said or conveyed to me. I believe it was telepathically, but I was asked what good I'd done in my life. And the next thing I knew, I was drawn to the left and watching a life review, a total review of the plane. I was shown a timeline of my life from conception to death, and I recall telling my father about it because he was still alive at the time. And I was telling him about it, and I was telling him about seeing him and my mother by an old Chevrolet. And he says, "Well, were you in the vision?" And I said, "No." He says, "Well, you just remember us." And I said, "Yes, I did." "What was your mother wearing?" he inquired. And I mentioned that she wore a plaid skirt that looked like a sweater, and I pointed out that you were standing next to her. "Remember, my mother was beaming." He paused for a moment, and then we went to this box with a bunch of pictures in it, and he took out this picture, and he showed me this photo of him and my mother, and they were standing in front of a Chevrolet. "Is this what you saw?" he asks. "That's exactly what I saw," I stated. He claims that this was one of the best days of our mother's life. "What are you on about?" I asked. "That was the day we just left the doctor's office," he says. "That was the day she found out she was pregnant with you. And I asked her to marry me. And then we married." And I said, "Wait a minute. Are you saying she was pregnant with me when you married?" He nods. And we were laughing about it. And he said that if he ever mentioned it to my mother while she was still alive, she would kill him. Apologies for the delay. They had been married for about 50 years when she died. That's fine. But as a young boy, I began to observe my own life, and it was incredible to watch the interactions and life lessons I'd learned. And when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my family and I used to go to San Jose on Saturdays, and my parents would go shopping, and Saturdays were for shopping. So we went into a store once, and I already knew how to work with my parents. I knew if I asked my father for something, I'd probably get it. And if I asked my mother, I'm sure she'd agree. But I wouldn't get it. She came from an Irish Catholic family, and she was very nice to me. But then I saw these baseball cards. It was a nickel pack, and I asked my father if I could get the baseball cards. And my mother heard me asking, and my father looked at my mother, and he said, "Ask your mother." That's how our family works. So I asked my mother, knowing full well that she would say no. "No," she says. So I stole the cards. And then I went shopping. And when we got home, I was in my bedroom, opening those baseball cards and having a little stick of hard gun in the package. And I took it out. I just put that in my mouth. And my mother opened the door and asked, "What do you have there?" And I'm in a lot of trouble. My parents loaded me into the car. My mother made a big deal about it. And then we went back to the store, and I had to take the baseball cards and what was left of the chewing gum, and I put them in a wrapper, and they asked to speak with the store manager, and he came out, and my mother said, "Our son stole these cards from you, and she just went on a rant about how it was unacceptable in our family. He could also call the cops if he wanted to. She didn't care about the outcome. And I could read this guy's mind. This is a 5-year-old child, he thought. Now I don't want to call the cops on him. If he finally says, just give me a nickel, I'll be happy. So my dad gave him a nickel and everything was fine with the store owner. And we returned home and I was grounded for I don't know how long, but I told my dad about it and he laughed. And I told him, you know, Dad, you and Mom did your job as parents. That had a huge impact on my life. And I thanked him for it. So I continued to keep an eye on my son, and I was able to grow and progress in my life. I had a lot of experiences, and some of the good ones were like when I met someone and fell in love. You get to feel it all over again. And it was absolutely wonderful. That was something I got to do all over again, but the most difficult thing I had to deal with, and still do, was betrayal. And it's all out there. There's nothing but the truth where I was. That's all it is. Truth. And I'm not sure if anyone in this audience has ever been through a divorce, but they can be very confrontational at times. And I had one of those divorces, and it was so bad that I didn't speak to my ex-wife for a long time. Years passed, and we had a daughter who is now an attorney, but she had to have surgery. It was for a cancer case. And I drove up to the hospital where her mother and I were both waiting. And this was after my near-death experiences. I was sitting in the room when I made the remark saying, you know, we haven't talked in a long time, and things were kind of tense between us. And I mentioned that we have a daughter who will most likely require both of us. Why don't we just bury the hatchet and make the best of the situation for her? And we agreed to do so. And I asked her, saying, you know, I want to ask you something. And if you want to tell me, that's fine. If you don't, it's the end of your life. And when I told her about some of the betrayal I witnessed, she admitted to it. What I'd seen in my life review actually occurred. All the betrayal, not just with her, but with people you work with or care about. You thought they were your friends. Maybe they did it on purpose. Maybe they didn't. But all that would be thrown right at you in my life review. And I've had a really difficult time dealing with that. And as I was going through my life review, I noticed something fidgeting on the right. And there was my dog, Scooter, who died in 2001, and I looked over to the right. I couldn't believe I saw her then. I had no idea there was an afterlife, but there she was, and she was overjoyed to see me. She couldn't come to me, but it was wonderful to see her. She was overjoyed, and I kept looking at my life review, and I saw myself in all of those different situations. I'm not sure how it happened, but I witnessed my children's birth. I got to experience both happy and sad moments, but I ended back up in my body in a hospital bed in the emergency room, and I was revived. And I later discovered that I had been dead for at least 45 minutes. They brought me back to life. And then I died again, and I was dead for about 10 minutes. And I was very fortunate. I had a Pakistani doctor who refused to let me die. He was a wonderful man. And the second time I died, I had a different kind of experience. I was perched atop the bed. I was watching them work on me. I could see the flat line on the monitor and heard them yell that they had lost me again. But my attention was not on them. It was centered on another area of the hospital. They put my personal belongings in the ambulance when I arrived, and there were a couple of people going through my wallet trying to figure out who the hell I was. I was watching them and listening to them talk. And some cops, and I'm one of them, carried 2 wallets, one with my regular stuff and one with my officer stuff. And then I have another wallet that has my badge and ID in it. And they were looking for my insurance cards. And I was trying to tell them where my insurance cards were because they were in my police wallet. I realized they couldn't hear me as I tried to speak to them. Then I realized I must be dead. And then I was revived. The doctor had brought me back. I was in intensive care for several days. Quite frankly, I was probably trying to stay around long enough for my daughter to travel to come down to see me and my son. And the doctor was always coming in to check in on me. And I had told him about what I'd seen about them going through my belongings while they were working on me in the emergency room. And when I died the second time, he says, "You saw that?" And I said, "Yes, I did. I heard everything they said." So he went and got the people who were working that day, brought them to my bed, and I told them what I told him. And I did. And when I told them that, they said yes, That's exactly what we said, word for word. I bring this up for a reason. You'll hear people talk about near-death experiences. Some will talk about a life for you. Some will mention hovering over their bodies. Some may discuss various topics. But here again, there's no cameras. There are no videos. You're like Marco Polo, Mark Twain, or Christopher Columbus in that you order something new and try to tell others about it. And all they have is your word for it. And I have 2 different types of near-death experiences on the same day. And if you hear someone else say something about hovering over the bed or seeing something, there are several types, and I spent a lot of time in the hospital. All I wanted to do was go home. I wanted to return to Oregon. The doctor did not want me to return to Oregon, and he said I needed another surgery. And I told him I just wanted to get home. Finally, he arranged for the next surgery to be performed by a colleague or someone new in Oregon. And he told me, he said, if I put you on a plane, as soon as you get to Oregon, you're going to have to go in and get that surgery done. And I promised I'd do it. So I did. I'm not sure how I got on that flight, but I did. I got all the way back to Oregon, and then I went and got to the hospital and had the next surgery. Anyway, I've regained consciousness. I've had 4,999 extra days of life as of today. Tomorrow makes 5,000. It truly is a blessing, and my life is one that I try and live every day like this is my last day. Michael Jackson, the rock star, died around the same time I did, and he was also dead for about 45 minutes. They also took him to a doctor in Los Angeles. I was reading about this at a hospital in Los Angeles where they were attempting to resuscitate him. And despite his reputation for raising the dead, this doctor was unable to resurrect Michael Jackson. I had this Pakistani doctor who refused to let me die, and I owe a lot to him. But I've often wondered what Michael Jackson would have given up for an extra 4,999 days of life. It truly is a blessing. I consider myself extremely fortunate. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you.